Hey, what's up? It's Jared. Today we're going to take a look at the Microsoft Surface 7. This is the seventh generation. This is the first generation of non-Intel chips. They have moved on and gone with a more integrated chipset, taking after Apple with their Apple Silicon. This is the Snapdragon X Elite edition. So this model has the 12 core. It also has the 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte. So it is a maxed out device, and I'm going to talk about my experiences with it. Now, I am predominantly a Mac user, but I've always had Windows devices that I utilize for different things. And I am always curious when a new Windows device comes out, especially something that has a lot of differences compared to previous models. Is that something that can lure me over to the Windows side and loosen my reliance on the Apple ecosystem? So that was my goal with getting this laptop and purchasing it myself from the Microsoft Store, trying to decide, is this something that is fit for me? So we're going to talk about the performance. We're going to talk about how it's went with me trying to use this device and replace my Mac for mainly my everyday stuff. I still rely on my Mac for video editing because I have a very high-end MacBook Pro, and this is more of a device that's designed for travel, for lighter work, even though it does have some good performance. We'll talk about that. But I wasn't getting this with the idea of replacing my MacBook Pro. I wanted to see if this would replace the device that I would grab and take to the coffee shop, that I would take with me on a short trip where I wanted to pack light, where I knew I didn't need to edit heavy video or maybe edit and export out hundreds of photos and do the different things that I typically would do as part of my workflow. But can this exist in my life? Because I love Windows, I enjoy it, but the Mac has always just fit my needs more clearly for the different things that I find myself doing. With that said, this is the fully spec'd out model, and I purchased it this way because I wanted the additional cores for when I did want to export some photos, do a little bit of heavier lifting there. I also wanted more RAM because 16 gigabytes of RAM just doesn't feel like enough to me these days. For most of the stuff that I'm doing, I tend to leave a few applications open. I'll have my browser open with multiple tabs, my task manager, maybe Microsoft Teams, and a handful of other things that are going to be open and going on in the background. And I don't want them to become RAM hogs. Then I'm suffering. I'm suffering somehow when I'm running out of RAM. So 32 gigs to help me get there. And then 1 terabyte of storage, which in my opinion is just not enough for me, not enough for what I typically do and want to have on a device. If I'm going to do some light video editing or anything like that, it's often that I'm going to need a little bit more than 1 terabyte of storage. What's great about this device is that supposedly, and I haven't tested this myself, but it is a removable solid state drive. This model has the 1 terabyte, but in theory, I should be able to remove that and install a 4 terabyte, which would give me plenty of storage on this device. Of course, it's not as simple as just popping it out and popping a new one in. You have to copy everything over. It has to be done a certain way in order for things to work again when you turn the computer back on. But knowing that I can upgrade the memory myself or the storage myself is absolutely fantastic. This new Snapdragon chip, I mean, you've probably heard about it. It's all integrated like the Apple Silicon. We're getting performance boosts and things that we just didn't think were possible on a small device like this before. And I've experienced some of that in my time using this laptop. Upon turning it on for the first time, in the past, I would go directly and download Geekbench and I'd want to see what the numbers would say. I didn't do that this time. I decided I'm not going to run Geekbench or any of those other benchmark tests until the very end to basically see if the numbers matched my experiences. And so none of these tests were ran ahead of time, then would color my opinion of this device. I just simply used it as if I was a new user to the device, installed the software, lived my life with it, and then ran the benchmark tests at the end to see if it fit my experiences. So I'm happy to say that my experiences with this device at the very beginning were absolutely fantastic. It powers up so fast. It's ready to go, downloading and installing new applications like Brave browser and some of the other things, Spark email, and some applications that aren't even ready yet for this new platform. Obviously, applications that are designed and developed for Intel are not necessarily ready to run on this device. Not all developers have come out with updated versions that run well on this Snapdragon platform. And so there's emulation involved, which can sometimes slow down software. We definitely are in a world with this device where not a lot of developers have done this yet. Forward-thinking developers, ones with more popular software, most likely have done this, but there's a lot of software that just, it's gonna be a while before we have supported software for this device. That doesn't mean that we can't run that software. It just means that it has to run an emulation, which is gonna be a slower process. And so that's really something to consider when deciding, should I jump on board of this new platform or should I give it time? I highly recommend checking with the software that you use on a daily basis, finding out, do they have an updated version that's going to operate on this, or am I okay with it running in emulation? Is that going to crush my performance and thus my productivity? Let's first just talk about the CPU and the GPU. My average everyday usage of web browsing, building websites, and doing digital marketing related stuff that's typically in a browser. I have my task manager, I'm checking email. All of those things aren't going to require a highly spec'd out computer. I could have gotten away with a entry-level version of this computer and been just fine. But when it comes to editing some photos, perhaps maybe I go out and shoot 50, 60 photos or something, and I want to get them on here. I want to edit them, and I want to export them quickly. Maybe do a little bit of light video editing, which I've only recently been able to do because Premiere Pro is now finally supported on this platform. It wasn't up until really recent. I didn't even think that it was ready yet, but I checked the other day and sure enough, it was there. So I was able to do a little bit of light video editing. Typically, I would not be doing that kind of work on this device, but it is portable. It's easier to take with me than my MacBook Pro 16-inch or other laptops that typically would be spec'd out for performance. This is a travel grab-and-go laptop that brings a lot of performance in a very compact size, and so I come with those expectations. Adobe Lightroom was working really well initially. I was able to export photos. I felt like things were going pretty well. I was unable to run some tests, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but my initial expectations were met with the performance that this device was giving me. With the 12 cores, with the RAM, with everything integrated into one chip, the performance boosts that I saw, and I don't have last year's model anymore. I did have last year's Surface laptop, but I don't have last year's model to compare. Last year's model was slower than what I would expect. If I'm comparing that to a Mac, maybe a MacBook M3, MacBook Air, or even a MacBook Pro, the performance just was so much slower on last year's model when it came to exporting photos and exporting video that I didn't lean on that device, and I eventually ended up selling it after finding myself frustrated at the performance that that model had. From memory, this is definitely faster. It performs better. Applications load faster. I'm able to get around the photos, make my edits quicker, and even export faster. But I am unable to run a test now that I'm testing at the end, which I probably shouldn't have done. I should have tested at the beginning when things were working. Now Lightroom is not loading. If I go and open up Lightroom, I get an application error. Now at first, I was also getting the same message for Adobe Photoshop and also for Adobe Creative Cloud. I was able to uninstall and reinstall Creative Cloud, and that worked. I was able to uninstall and reinstall Photoshop, and that worked. Lightroom, however, continues to be stuck. I have uninstalled it. I've uninstalled the preferences. I uninstalled Adobe Photoshop. I uninstalled everything Adobe, made sure that there were no remnants left behind, and then tried to reinstall. I'm still getting this error. So I don't know what the problem is, but I'm unable to use Adobe Lightroom at this time. Perhaps a software update is coming or something is coming that will fix that problem. A little bit of Google searching, and I couldn't find anything specific to this problem happening recently. I've seen this problem happen before in the past. I saw some fixes for it, but nothing that addresses the Snapdragon platform and Adobe Lightroom right now. So who knows what the issue is. And yes, all software is updated on the computer. I tried restarting. I tried all the things, and then I finally gave up. So I can't test to see how fast my typical exports would be compared to another and give you some sort of result other than my own experiences, which is when it was working, it seemed to be working well. And I could say the same for Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro, I haven't had any issues with since installing it. It loads. I can get around videos pretty quick. The playback is okay. It's not perfect. And then also the rendering is okay. It's not perfect. And I know that I'm limited by my storage space. Most of my videos that I export are probably going to be close to half of the storage on this device anyway. So with that said, performance has been pretty good on this device with some caveats that I know are probably just results of this platform, the Snapdragon platform, being relatively new and all software still working out the bugs and the kinks and trying to make things work on this platform. Even though this device has been out for a little while now, a month or so, and the Snapdragon, this whole platform, people have been able to develop for it for even longer. Not a terribly long amount of time, but a little bit longer. Bugs and kinks are still being worked out. It's not as fluid as an experience as one would hope. Apple went through their growing pains too with moving over to Apple Silicon. There's going to be a little bit of that here. Once again, I highly suggest you check with the software that you use most commonly. Make sure it's going to work before you decide to go with a Snapdragon device, or just make sure that you order your device from somewhere with an ample return policy so that you can spend the time testing on your own. So let's talk a little bit more about the device itself, not so much about the Snapdragon-esque issues that I've experienced so far. This has a 13.8-inch touch display, which Surface has done. I mean, it's always been great, and the displays are absolutely fantastic and vibrant. There's a lot of glare though. I get a lot of glare on this. You could even see in this top-down shot, even just moving my hand. Yes, I do have some lights coming through, but this display is hard to use with light spilling in. So if I had sun coming in through the window, I would have to really reposition myself more so than I might normally with another laptop, just because it is a very glossy display. And with that, it's a very beautiful display. When I was editing my photos, I loved the colors that this display was giving me. I felt like I was on a really nice high-end device as far as viewing my images and making changes and adjustments to them. I was very impressed with the display. Microsoft's done a good job with their displays, definitely, and no slouching here at all. The display itself has a 120 hertz refresh rate, which I haven't tested with any gaming. I typically don't do a lot of gaming, but where I do see that refresh rate shining through is when I'm moving around in applications a lot, I'm browsing the web and scrolling around a lot, when I'm editing video and I want that smooth playback and I don't want to see any sort of aliasing or any weird jitteriness. Having a fast refresh rate that goes beyond the frame rate that I shot the videos with is absolutely fantastic and very noticeable when I'm spending time editing and doing different things on a device like this. You'll notice that it is plugged into the Microsoft dock. This is the Surface dock, the latest version. Yes, it's USB-C. The side of the laptop itself has that proprietary plug, that Surface proprietary plug. And it was maybe initially a little frustrating for me when I pulled this dock out of the box and it plugged into USB-C. I totally get why it does. USB-C, probably a better platform, better protocol than what Microsoft has going on over here, but it's still there. Why not just get rid of that altogether? The dock isn't going to utilize it. If I'm going to use a dock to dock to a monitor or an external display, it's going to be USB-C, using up one of my USB-C ports. Yes, the dock has USB-C and A on the front, and then it has two of each on the back and Ethernet on the back and a headphone jack. That's great, but it's using up one of my USB-C ports when Microsoft, with your proprietary plug that is here still in existence on the side of this laptop, can't use it with the dock. I don't know why they decided to go in that direction. And yes, my dock has some scuffs on it, and it came out of the box that way, which is slightly irritating too. I did not scuff it. With that said, I mean, the charging brick that comes with the laptop plugs in over on this side. So you do have two USB available. When you're not using the dock, you can plug in over here and charge. Having your two USB ports over here on the side, as well as a USB-A is nice, and a headphone jack, can't forget that. So good port selection, but man, it would be great if the dock used the Microsoft, whatever it's called, over on the side that I'm irritated that's there, especially having purchased the dock. But the performance of external displays, which is one of the reasons why you'd get something like this. If I'm at a desk and I'm using an external display, put my laptop off to the side, I didn't notice any degradations in performance. I used to see that, especially with the smaller Microsoft laptops, like the smaller Surface that didn't have its own dedicated graphics card. Typically, with a Windows machine, if you didn't have a dedicated graphics card you plug into an external display, I noticed issues, especially when editing video and doing things that are going to lean on the GPU performance a little bit. You'd see the performance of your display suffer, or the display using some of that performance you'd see suffering in the software that you were using. Not so much of that here. I didn't notice any difference. And even without the dock and with using a more portable external display over USB-C, didn't notice any issues there either. And so I feel like the graphics performance is improved. And we'll look at some of the benchmark tests here in a minute just to compare things. Let's now talk about battery life. Battery life has always been the plague of a Windows machine. And while I have to say I'm impressed with the improvements to battery life, it definitely still does not reach what I would expect and what I definitely get out of, say, the MacBook Air M3 will perform similar tasks for a longer amount of time. That Mac still seems to shine there, but I think this is one of the first Windows laptops that you could go and do most things for a long period of time and not have to worry about your battery dying after a couple of hours. Yes, they've always touted 12, 14 hours of battery life doing things like browsing the web or watching a movie. Like, who does 20 hours of local video playback? That's a spec that's on Microsoft's website for this particular laptop. Up to 20 hours of local video playback. That's never a situation that I find myself in. But up to 13 hours of active web usage, that definitely is something that I find myself doing. I did not experience 13 hours of usage on this device. However, I definitely saw 6 hours of the usage that I put on a laptop like this, which is having Brave browser opened with probably like a dozen tabs opened on it as well. I had ClickUp opened, which is how I do project and task management. I had Spark email opened up. And so these applications were running, and I still saw 6 hours of usage out of this device. That is huge. I've never been able to experience that on a smaller, compact laptop that's running Windows. It just doesn't exist, but now it does. And it's exciting to live in a world where I could be on a Windows machine and not have to be tethered to a wall adapter. Absolutely fantastic. So I do feel like we are now in a place where you can have more freedom and utilize a Windows laptop on the go without having to worry about having power nearby at all times. It still doesn't meet the expectations that I would have, being that I use Mac products, but it is so darn close and so much closer than it's ever been before. And I think it's probably just going to get better as Windows and everything else becomes more optimized, software becomes more optimized and doesn't have to run in emulation, which definitely utilizes more resources, all of those things. It's going to get better. I just know it will. So now, how's the speaker performance? Let's take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. It's not bad, you guys. Like, I feel like the only thing it's missing is a little bit of depth. It is very high on the tones, not a whole lot of depth there, but definitely a good audio experience. I'm not one who's going to be listening to a whole bunch of audio and stuff from the laptop, but when I am in a situation where I need to play back, maybe I'm editing video or something like that, or I'm showing somebody something, I want that audio to sound relatively good. And I think the Surface 7 does just that. So now let's take a look at the Geekbench results that I had. These are the benchmark tests that I ran on this device just earlier today. Now, we have a single core score of 2,543. Now, to compare that to some other devices, we have the MacBook Air M3, which is 3,141. So the single core is a bit slower than the Mac. If I look back on previous Windows devices that I've had in the past, I ran the same test on the Surface Laptop Studio 2, which had a single core performance of 1631. So more performance on the single core here than what I experienced probably about a year ago on the Laptop Studio 2. And then as far as multi-core on this laptop, 14,199, which actually is pretty good, almost 14,200. And if I look at the Laptop Studio 2 from last year, it was 9,629. And so quite a bit of performance increase out of this compared to a device that should have a lot more performance just because it's an i7 Intel greatest chip at the time for that particular device. Considering the class of the device, the Laptop Studio 2, even though it's last year's model, that device is bigger, it has more performance, or it should anyways, based on the specs and the hardware that it comes with. However, this laptop outperforms it completely. Now, if we look at the multi-score of the MacBook Air, 12,000, and this device 14,200. So multi-core score is higher, and that has to do with the fact that this has more cores. This is a 12-core device, which as the M3 MacBook Air is a 10-core device, so that's where we get the difference in number. But having those extra cores means that software that can utilize those extra cores will see performance benefits there. And if we compare to the only M4 device that's available right now, which would be the iPad Pro 13-inch M4 or even the 11-inch M4, you can see the 11-inch M4 has a single core score of almost 3,800, so that's significantly faster than the 2,543 of this device. And then when you get to multi-core score, it's pretty close to the same. 14,621 on the iPad, 14,200 on this device. Keep in mind, the iPad, not as many cores as this device, even though it is the M4. So really good as far as performance, I would say. And my experience of using this device matches these numbers that we're seeing. These numbers are good. And my experiences as far as performance were good as well. Let's talk about graphics performance. The graphics performance on this device, I tested it in OpenCL and Vulkan. OpenCL, 20,482. And then when I compare that to other devices that were OpenCL, perhaps going back to Laptop Studio 2, which has a RTX 4060 in it, of course, that is not a fair comparison because this has all integrated graphics. The 4060 is a separate graphics card, which core sole job is to perform for graphics, and that was 83,000. And so 83,000, that's significantly faster than this device. But if we look at comparing the score here to, let's say, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Air M3 had a score of just shy of 48,000. The score here, 24,000. And so this is where we see kind of a big discrepancy is when it comes to the graphics performance. This still kind of acts like an Intel device with onboard graphics as opposed to an Intel device with a separate graphics card. And that's what we see in that Surface Studio laptop is a CPU and a GPU separate from each other. And we see good performance typically in both of those. With this system, both of those are married together into one chip. We see really good CPU performance, but I don't see really good GPU performance. And I wish that we were seeing GPU performance that was more on par with what we're seeing in the MacBook Air M3, especially considering the MacBook Air M3 is about to be replaced by the M4. And, if we look at the M4 performance on the iPad, so let's look at the M4 performance here is almost 54,000. And so that pulls ahead even more than the M3 MacBook. So is that really going to matter for you? I think that it is if you're doing anything with gaming or creative work. With creative work, that software typically leans on graphics performance for exporting and rendering, and you're going to want that extra graphics performance. Most definitely in games, graphics performance is important as well. So I don't think that you're going to see the graphics performance out of this device that you would want if you are an avid gamer and were hoping that this platform was going to bring you to that place. You're probably going to need some sort of a laptop that has its own discrete graphics, which allows for dedicated graphics performance, because this particular Snapdragon setup just isn't quite there yet. Super impressive and has performed really well. But as far as graphics performance, we're definitely not getting the performance that we're getting out of other modern devices with a similar type of chipset configuration. So with that said, I have not tested those things in depth. And I'm not saying that this is underpowered by any means. I'm just putting out there that if you're going to expect to do heavier lifting tasks, gaming, video editing, stuff like that on this device, you're probably not going to have the graphics performance you were hoping. But you are going to have better graphics performance than if you had went with an Intel device that has onboard graphics, such as the Surface Laptop Go, which had a test score of 11,825. This is more than double the performance of that. And if I look back even further into some of my other devices that I've tested that I know have onboard graphics, perhaps this micro PC from AceMagic that only had 7,147 as far as the compute score. And the last Surface Pro 9 that I have, which is 14,285. And so 24,225, quite a bit more than that. So you are going to have boosts in performance, but you just might not have enough to kick it over the edge and really consider this a competitor with some of the new things that are coming out from Apple, or maybe even some of the things that are currently in existence from that lineup. So that's my experiences, though. You really have to look at a device based on how you're going to be using it. And I have to say the Surface Laptop 7 is a extremely capable device that I know is just going to get better and better as software updates come out. And most importantly, support from all of the different applications that we might find ourselves using. So I've got links to this laptop down in the description below. I hope that this kind of thorough discussion in my experiences with this device was useful. If it is, click that subscribe button. Definitely appreciate that. And it helps not only support the channel, but helps with YouTube recommending my channel to others. Give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone, and I hope to see you back in another video soon. Take care.